So this is a podcast. This is going to be the story of the Graham.
The Graham automobile.
Yep.
Most people haven't heard of a Graham automobile, but you're seeing one behind us right now.
Yep. I think it's actually been one of those constants in my life. You've almost always had a Graham of one type or another sitting in the garage.
Yeah. So my story with Graham, I guess we'll tell the story of the Graham, and then we'll tell my story of the Graham. But my story of the Graham started back when I was in high school, and my stepfather, who was a car nut aficionado, I guess, came home and he said, "Hey, I've got a car that we can restore, and it's up in Indianapolis, and we can drive up there and bring it home, and we'll work on it." And it was a 1937 Graham supercharged sedan. So Graham was a brand that maybe people don't know today. The Graham brothers were three brothers from southern Indiana. I think their family money had come from glass of some kind, making glass bottles or something like that. They also had farms. There's still the Graham farms in southern Indiana. Washington, Indiana is the area they're from. Anyway, they they started building trucks for Dodge brothers in the 1920s, and somewhere in the late 1920s, mid to late 1920s, they sold their truck business to Dodge, and it became the Dodge Truck Company. And they decided they wanted to get into building cars, so they bought another company called the Page Car Company, and for a couple of years, the Graham Car Company was called the Graham Page Car Company. And then they dropped the Page name, and they just changed it to Graham.
Oh, I didn't know that. I always thought it was Graham Page.
Nope, it was Graham after I think about 1930 or so. They just went by Graham. So in 1930, and this is just at the beginning of the stock market crash and all that, they built a brand new factory in Detroit, in Dearborn, Michigan, outside of Detroit. And they built a brand new engineering center, and they had the finest engineering center in the country at that time. And so Graham, for the next 5 to 7 years, right in the middle of the Depression, was doing the most unique and interesting cars out there. They had better engineering than all the other car companies. So in 1935, they put what they called a supercharged engine in their car. They had the most powerful and the fastest production car available in 1935 and got the best fuel economy. Interestingly, they touted the fuel economy rather than the speed and the power. But at that time, a Ford V8 had about 65 horsepower, and a Graham supercharged had 116 horsepower.
Oh, wow.
So they had a lot more power than even a Ford V8.
Was that typical, like to have around 60 horsepower back then?
Oh, actually 65 was a lot. Most cars had 40 or 50 back then. Of course, today a Honda Civic has 150 horsepower or something like that. So, these cars were full-size cars, and they had just 150 horsepower. So my stepfather, we went up and we put it on a trailer, and we brought this Graham back home. It needed a complete restoration. And over the next 3 or 4 years, we restored that car. And I didn't know much about cars back then, but I knew how to work. And so I cleaned the car and scraped the rust off and cleaned everything up a little bit, and did all the grunt work, I guess. And my stepfather hired people. He hired somebody to rebuild the engine, the supercharged engine, got it running. We redid the frame and the body, and had some body shop people do some work on the body, put it all back together. And he sewed the seats himself. He borrowed a sewing machine, bought the material, and sewed the seats. And for the next 3 or 4 years, he took it around to all the car shows, the Graham car shows. We had
what's the time frame, real quick? When you guys?
This is in the mid to late 70s.
Okay,
1970s.
So how was that car, right? It was like a 35-year-old car at that point?
Well, it was 1937, so it was almost 40 years old at the time. So
did it feel like an old car back then?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was an old car. There's no doubt about it. It was old even back then. And, that car today is 100 years old. I'm coming now at 90 years old at this point. So anyway, the story of that car was my stepfather passed away while I was in college. So he was toward the end of his life. He had some health problems, and he passed away toward the end of college, or when I was in college, and I ended up with the car. So I ended up with actually two cars of his. One was a Model A convertible that he did not restore. It was unrestored. And I actually sold that car to pay for my college. I knew I would regret it later, and I probably do, but I don't have that car. I knew it was probably more important to me to have college money and pay for college than have that car. But I kept the Graham.
So do you think the experience of working on the Graham in high school was kind of influential in terms of the college you went to and the direction of your career?
I went to a college called General Motors Institute. It was owned by General Motors. I went to college to be an automotive engineer. I ended up being an engineer more in aerospace than automotive, but it had an influence on me. Everybody told me I was good at math. I needed to be an engineer, and I loved cars. I mean, I just loved working on cars. I loved that car. And I kept that car, and it was actually in pretty good shape. And I kept the car through when you were born and young, but I kept it in storage buildings because we didn't have a place to store it. And it got mice in it, and it got it kind of got out of disrepair. And in the early 2000s, it was not really in running condition anymore. It would start, but it really wasn't running and driving anymore. It needed to be restored, needed to be gone through again. And I was going to try to do it myself, but I was traveling a lot for work. I didn't have time to really do anything like that. And I didn't really have the tools at the time or the skills completely to do that. So I actually went to a restoration shop. And this is kind of a common story. It's a sad story, but it's kind of common. I went to this restoration shop, and I won't name the shop, but it was I got all kinds of references, and these people were highly regarded, and I took them to Graham, and they had never heard of a Graham. Most people haven't heard of a Graham. And I took it to them, and
this is the time period, this is kind of right before everyth's on the internet, right? So it's not like you can...
Yeah, there's not really video. Don't have YouTube videos that teach you how to do stuff. So
you can't even find reputable. It's hard to find people that have done this before and know a good shop and whatnot.
With Graham's, it was really hard to find, but I took it to this was kind of a reputable shop. But anyway, the guy took it apart and then doubled the price on me, and I was not happy about that. And because the car really wasn't worth what I was going to pay to have it restored. And he took it apart, and he gave me gave me a call, and he said, well, it's an old car. It's taken a long time to take apart and clean up all the parts. And I said, hey, you do cars all the time, And over time, I found somebody else that had done the same thing. So I told him I wasn't going to work with him anymore, and I told him, pack it up, and I'll come and get it. He said, it's in 500 pieces. You can't come and get it. I said, I'll come and get it. So I came and got it in 500 pieces in 2 trailer loads. And that may or may not have been a mistake. But when my stepfather passed away, I had a half-sister, Dana, and Dana was my stepfather's daughter. And Dana and her husband wanted the car. My sister and her husband were interested in this car, so we took the car down to hit their house, and they had a brand new barn that he was doing car restoration in, and that was kind of the end of it. I was going to give the car to them, just the way it was. And actually, what they had gotten, the guy did good work. What they'd gotten done was they'd completed the frame, they'd completed the engine, they had the rear axle redone. So it was on its way to getting done, but the suspension wasn't on and the engine wasn't in the car. So I got I gave it to Greg. Greg had the car for I think 5 or 6 years in his garage and never got to it. And he called me up and he said, Eric, I'm never going to do this car. I don't really want the car anymore. I want to do something else with my space, and so I'm either going to sell it or give it back to you. So I ended up with the car back again. And I actually rented some space to work on the car. At that point, I decided to work on the car. I rented some shop space. brought the car back, and I started trying to put it back together, and it was in 500 pieces. I didn't know how it went back together. And so for a couple of years, I was looking around trying to find, and there's not a lot of information on Grahams. I couldn't find pictures of the suspension. It was literally the front suspension. I didn't know how it went back together. And I was calling around trying to find, I was trying to find people that knew how they worked. I literally was trying to find a car that I could take pictures of. And one year, probably, I don't know, it might have been 8 or 9 years ago.
Or 2012 or 20.
It was probably 2015 or 16. I was Greg and I were up at the Auburn Cord Duesenberg Festival. They used to have a big auction there with thousands of cars. And there was a 1936 Graham that was very similar. It was a different color, but it was very similar to the 1937 Graham I had. It was sitting out there, and it had a sign on it. It was ready for the auction. And I was underneath the car with my phone taking pictures of the suspension and crawling all over it and taking pictures of all the things and stuff like that. And my brother-in-law, Greg, he said, well, Eric, why don't you just buy this car? Then you'll have one. It was all complete. The car had been probably sitting for a little while, but it had been restored. It was a pretty nice car. It didn't have the supercharger on it. It was a supercharged car, but it had lost the supercharger somewhere along the way. And so we bid on the car and we bought it. It went pretty cheap. And so I called my wife and I said, I bought a car. And she wasn't real happy about that. But we brought it home. I think I brought it home the next day. And it was it was in better condition, obviously. And
so real quick, because this is Graham number 2 that we're moving on to.
This is number 2.
You missed a couple of important stories about Graham number 1.
Yeah, I did.
So first off, my memories of the Graham was that, it was us, the first car, it was green. And so me and my buddies growing up when we were kids, we used to crawl back, into the garage, and we'd sit in the back of it and, drive the wheels and whatnot. I still remember the smell of it and everything. And I think at least once or twice you got it out and we drove it to a park and kind of took it to a, I don't know, it's probably a cars and coffee event type of thing. Yeah. But it was really cool. Kind of having that in the back. But there's 2 stories. So the first story I remember that I don't think you covered was you said you met Jay Leno kind of before Jay Leno was was Jay Leno, and you said you talked to him about the Graham.
Yeah. So the Jay Leno story is kind of interesting. So I had a buddy when I was in college. I had a buddy of mine that worked as a door guy. I don't know if he was a bouncer. He was a skinny guy, but he worked at the Comedy Place here in Indianapolis. And I don't remember what it was called at the time, but it was on the north side of town. And he said, hey, there's this really, he knew that everybody knew that I like cars. And he said, there's this really funny guy that's coming in and doing the comedy show. He's kind of a rising star in the comedy circuit. But he loves cars. He tells a lot of jokes about cars. You ought to come out and see him, on Friday night or Saturday night or whatever it was. And I went, and my buddy got me in. I didn't have any money to go to comedy shows or anything like that, but I went, and Jay Leno was there, and he was the kind of the headliner that night.
And when was this?
This was probably mid 80s, probably 84, maybe 83, 84, probably 80. I don't know. It was early 80s, and so. That night, I went up to my buddy, got me backstage it wasn't really backstage at a comedy club, but he introduced me to Jay Leno after the show, and Jay and I started talking about cars, and I was telling him about my Graham car, and at that point my stepfather had passed away, and I had this car, and he knew what a Graham was. He knew about the supercharged engine, and he was a car guy even back then. And he was talking about all these cars he was going to buy if he ever got enough money, or he was kind of a poor comedian at the time. But we had a good evening talk. We didn't really ever follow up about it, but I thought that was kind of an interesting evening. So Jay's pretty big into cars now.
Yep.
Pretty well known.
Yep. And I think you know the second story.
Yeah, the second story. Well, the second story actually is a little bit later than that one, but I met my wife, Kathy, and we decided to get married, and we had a wedding. And my best friend is a guy named Rick, was my college roommate. Rick lives up in Michigan, and I decided I wanted to get a nice car. I always my dream car, from when I was little, was a Duesenberg, and I really wanted to get a Duesenberg to drive in a wedding, drive away from the wedding in a Duesenberg. Well, we couldn't do that. I didn't know anybody that had a Duesenberg, and they probably wouldn't have let me use it anyway. But we had the Graham, and so what happened was I drove the Graham down to our wedding, and we drove away from the wedding in the back of the Graham, and my friend Rick, he was my best man in the wedding. He drove us away in the 1937 Graham, and we have wedding pictures of Kathy and I in the Graham, in the back of the Graham, and it was a lot of fun. Actually, somebody came out. I heard later it was my sister, but somebody came out and decorated the car up, and, with the just married and the tin cans on the back and all that stuff. But I remember the other story about that was we had driven the car down, and we lived about 10 or 15 miles west on the west side of town, and the wedding reception was downtown. And Kathy and I were driving back home to my place to the night of the wedding, and then the next morning we were going to Chicago and going on our honeymoon. And when we went to drive back home, it was pouring rain, and we had to drive that car. And it wasn't a modern car. It didn't have great windshield wipers, and I'm driving that car, praying that it didn't break down on the way back to my house. And we left it there, and we were able to get out. I'm not sure, but I think we might have driven up to Chicago and taken a flight out of Chicago to Cancun on our honeymoon. But anyway, that's the story of the 1937 Graham.
Oh, real quick, just side story. While we're on the topic of your wedding, who'd you meet that morning?
Oh yeah, that was an interesting. So Rick, my friend, came down probably the night before, but we had to go pick his tuxedo up, and it was downtown in Indianapolis. And that day, it was in 1987. It was in the late summer of 1987. It was August 1987. They were having the Pan American Games in Indianapolis, and we drove downtown, and we were driving across as we picked up his tuxedo, and we're driving back out of town. He said, "Hey, I want to see if there's a place to get a T-shirt for these Pan American Games." It was big national news. And we were driving across the IUPUI campus, a college campus on the downtown Indianapolis, and there was a tent with Pan Am Games souvenirs and T-shirts and hats and all that kind of stuff. And there was a little sign out in the front that said, "Meet the champ from 9 to noon." And we're like, I wonder who the champ is. I don't know who the champ is, but we were stopping to get T-shirts anyway. So Rick got himself a T-shirt, and I think I got a T-shirt. And back in the back of the tent, sitting in a lawn chair, was Muhammad Ali, the champ. He was the champ. And it didn't say Muhammad Ali. It didn't advertise. It just said the champ. So we went back there. We were pretty surprised to see Muhammad Ali the morning of my wedding, sitting in a lawn chair back there. And we went back there and talked to him. He was there with his wife and maybe a couple other people. And he had Parkinson's disease, and he already had it pretty bad at that point in time. He really couldn't make signatures, but he had these little cards, business cards with his signature on it. And he would underline his signature and hand you the card. And I remember my friend Rick said, "Hey, champ, give me the look." And he kind of held his hands up like this. And Muhammad Ali gave him the Muhammad Ali, mean look that he did on TV all the time. And it was kind of a funny moment. But yeah, we met Muhammad Ali the day I got married.
Yeah, that was kind of funny.
That is cool.
So we can move on to Graham number 2.
Yeah, so the 1936 Graham. So we got the 1936 Graham home, and so this is the story with you. Here we are in 2019, and we have the 1936 Graham. I've got it over at my shop. I haven't I started to put back the 1937 Graham. I did get the suspension back together. And the 1936 Graham is sitting there, and it's not running exactly right. I mean, it had been sitting for a little while. It looked really good. It has a great interior, has a great exterior, but it wasn't running right, and I couldn't get it running right. And
I had called you probably a year in advance. Maybe. Yeah. I don't know if I gave you that much time.
No, you didn't give me that much time. It was more like 3 months, I think.
Okay. Well, I didn't realize how much work you'd put into it. But yeah, Cassandra and I, my wife now, back then we were getting married in Louisville, Kentucky. So actually the home of the champ.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And so, I always knew that they got married in the Graham. And so I said, hey, you've got that other Graham. Can you bring it down for the wedding so that Cassandra and I can drive away after we get married?
Yeah.
Sort of complete the circle.
Yeah, so I thought that was a great idea. I thought that was pretty cool. It's a little different color, Graham. But it's the same body style. It looks very similar. And so I set out to get this Graham running. And I have to tell you, I took the engine apart on that Graham 3 times trying to get it running. And I could not. I bought new spark plugs. I bought new distributor parts and everything, and I put them in it, and it just didn't run right. And I was like, well, I don't know why this thing's not running right. And so after taking the engine apart and putting it back together twice, I started swapping parts off the 1937 Graham, and I just couldn't get it to run right. I mean, nothing would work. And it was coming down to the wire. We were getting close to the wedding. I thought I was going to have to call you and tell you I couldn't do it. And I swapped the spark plugs. I had bought brand new spark plugs. I swapped the spark plugs and the car started up and ran perfect. The brand new spark plugs I had didn't work. 2 of them were bad. So it would only run on 4 cylinders. So by that point, I put the spark plugs from the old car, and I bought new spark plugs and got them in it, and it was running pretty good. The problem was it still made a little bit of smoke. It wasn't. It was burning a little bit of oil. But we took it down to Kentucky, Louisville. I towed it down there on a trailer. We drove it over to the church where you got married, and it turns out my friend Rick is at your wedding. And at the last minute, I was going to drive you guys away from the church in the 1936 Graham. And at the last minute, I thought, it wouldn't be cool if Rick drove you away in that Graham. So my friend Rick gets in the car and, in front of the church, starts the car up and drives you guys away in a little bit of a cloud of smoke. But
that car was a hit. Everybody
loved that car. Everybody was waiting to see you drive that car away. And I think you drove it down from the church to the hotel where the reception was. And I think you got there and people were taking pictures of you in front of the reception area. And
I think it was the Seelbach is where we got married, or where the reception was.
Yeah, Seelbach Hotel. Yeah, and I think it's a beautiful old hotel. So this car was kind of magnificent in front of it, and we'd got it all shined up, and it was really good. The funny thing about it was, I drove the car from the hotel that night or the next night. I drove it back over to the hotel, back over to where the trailer was, which was a couple blocks away, to put it back on the trailer, and it died, and it wouldn't restart. I couldn't get it restarted. So since I've gotten restarted. Anyway, so we had the 1937 Graham, we had the 1936 Graham, and I had always been looking for a special car that Graham made called a Graham Hollywood. And the Graham Hollywood was a car that they made for 2 years, 1940 and 1941. They actually made them all in 1940, and they made about 1,500 of these cars. But they were really special cars because in the 1930s, there was a car called a Accord. And a Accord was a very unusual car. Some people say it's the most beautiful car ever made. It was a front-wheel drive car. It was a unibody car. Nobody did front-wheel drive cars back then. Nobody did unibody cars. It had pop-up headlamps on the front of it. It had this long hood. Because it was front-wheel drive, it had a V8 engine, had an aircraft engine, a Lycoming, I think it was, engine in the front. But it was turned backwards, and it drove the front wheels. It had an unusual transmission, almost kind of a semi-automatic transmission in it. But they're very hard to find, and they're fairly expensive cars, and they never worked exactly right. I mean, they never developed them. And Cord tried to build these cars in 1936, 1937, and they went out of business.
I didn't know that. Cord was they've only built cars for
they had built
years?
cars. They had built other cars prior to that. They had, you can buy cars from, I think in the 1920s, I think they built cars. But the Cord 810, 812, which was this really special car, was only built in 1936 and 1937, and they went out of business. And I don't know how many they built. They built, a few thousand of them. They were fairly expensive cars. Anyway, somehow, there was a guy that was a big car.
Real quick, just for context, the 30s, it was pretty hard to sell cars.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was all the car companies. So, many car companies existed in the 1920s. And then in the 1930s, during the Depression, it wiped most of them out. Almost all of them went out of business. And that was right when Graham was actually, increasing sales. They had a car in 1932 called the Blue Streak, which was fantastic and literally dictated the styling of all cars after that. Within a couple of years, everybody had copied the Blue Streak. They had a car. They built the supercharged engine and introduced that to the passenger car. It was a big hit on fuel economy, a big hit on power and speed and comfort.
Didn't they have another innovation where it was the suspension, sort of put the car low to the ground? Yeah,
they did. Yeah, that was the Blue Streak. They did. That was one of the things was they built the kind of the fenders. They built the fenders different. Before the Blue Streak, the fenders were kind of open. They enclosed the fenders, but they also, fixed the suspension. So the car, before that, the car frame had ridden on top of the car suspension. So cars sat pretty high, and they actually lowered that down to where it lowered the car closer to the ground. It was just a really sleek design. It's a really neat car. If you ever see a Graham Blue Streak, 1932 through 1934, 32 through 34 Graham, they're just a really neat looking car. And then in 1938, Graham did something really unusual. So we had a 1936 and 1937. In 1938, they did something that was not a hit. They built a car called a shark nose, and it actually had almost a negative angle on the grill. It had a angle out.
Yeah, it came out from the car.
Yeah, and they had all their sedans were shark nose sedans, and they called it the wave of the future. It was not a hit. It didn't. It almost put them out of business. The cars did not sell. The 36s and 37s had sold really well, but then the shark nose didn't sell very well. So they needed something. They were really kind of desperate. And the Cord body dies actually got acquired by a guy that was a big car guy, a big car dealer. When they went through bankruptcy, he bought all the body tooling and equipment that you could build the Cord car. And he was intending to build another Cord car, but he didn't have a car company. So he originally went to the Hupmobile car company, but the Hupmobile car company was about to go out of business too. They didn't have any money. They built a couple of prototype cars off of the Cord body dies and couldn't put it into production. So Hupmobile actually took that design over to Graham, and the Graham factory had capacity, and Graham built a car off of the Cord body dies, and that is the Graham Hollywood, which you see behind us right now. It's a beautiful car. Some people say it's more beautiful than the Cord was. It is not a front-wheel drive car. It was a rear-wheel drive car. They put the Graham a now 125 horsepower 6-cylinder supercharged engine in it. Some of them were not supercharged. Most of them were supercharged. And it's a rear-wheel drive car, so it does have a little bit of a tunnel in it that the Accord didn't have. And it has a different front end. And the Accord front end was very distinctive because it had that long, what they call coffin hood, had the pop-up headlights. Graham did not put pop-up headlights on it. They put conventional headlights on it. The Graham car was much cheaper than the Accord car. And they're fairly hard to find cars. And this is one behind me. I'd been looking for one for a long time. And about 2-3 years ago, I saw one, an ad for one in Chicago. And I went up and looked at it, and it was this car. It runs and drives. It had been restored in about 2018 by a body shop guy, and his son, the body shop guy was older, and he'd always wanted to restore this car, and he had it, and they restored it together. And unfortunately, in COVID, he passed away, and his son had it, and his son didn't really need it anymore. He said he was going to sell it. So I ended up buying it and bringing it home, and we've had it in a couple car shows. It's a really unusual car. It's a Graham Hollywood supercharged sedan. Basically, from the firewall back, it's identical to Accord. There's a couple little differences. The taillights are in a different spot, and the windshield wipers are at the bottom of the windshield instead of the top. The Accord, they had them hanging down from the top, and Graham put them at the bottom. But Graham actually made the car work. So Accords, are notoriously poor, unreliable cars, and Graham actually made the car so you could run it and drive it. It's a beautiful car. It's a kind of a compact car inside. It's not as big as you think it's going to be, but it's a wonderful car. So that's the story of Graham. That's the story of our Grahams. We still have all three of them. We have the 1936, the 1937, and the Hollywood.
So it's kind of funny because so I live down in Florida nowadays, and so I try to make it back. I don't know, once a quarter. I usually don't make it back that many times, but I was coming home to see the parents, and Dad calls me and he's like, "Okay, yeah, I'm here to pick you up or whatever from the airport," and he pulls up with this thing on the flatbed behind him, and it's just kind of a I was like, "What is this?" And
did I come get you at the airport?
You picked me up at the airport pulling this thing.
Oh, really?
You didn't tell me you'd gotten this thing or anything. So
I forgot about that.
I was blown away. I thought it was the coolest looking car ever. So I think I've got some pictures. I'll have to put those pictures up. But yeah, there's a couple more stories on this car that I don't think we covered. One is there's a few unique parts on this car, right? That are not.
Yeah, this car's not 100% original. So the paint color, it's a kind of bright blue. The paint color is actually nearly an original color, but it is they actually matched it to a 1960s Ford color that was on a Thunderbird, and it actually has some metal flake in it. So in the 1930s or 1940s, when these cars were built, they didn't have metal flake paint. In the 1960s, they had metal flake paint. So the paint color is fairly similar, but not exact.
So I remember when you brought this thing home, one of the slight drawbacks that you were a little annoyed about was the paint color. You were like, it's not an original paint color. And so I got on the internet and I found an original ad.
Yeah,
that showed that,
and it shows the blue color, and it is an original color. So yeah, I didn't really like the car. The other because I thought the paint color was off. I didn't think they had any nice colors like this back in the 40s, but they did. The second thing that's off on this car is the wheels. The wheels are wire wheels, and they didn't have wire wheels on the Grahams back then. But I actually really like the wire wheels on this car. They look really good. The third thing is this car doesn't have Graham bumpers on it. It has Cord bumpers. The front and rear bumpers are from a Cord car, not a Graham car. And then the other thing is the interior is a little different. It's got a vinyl interior from probably the 60s or 70s. It doesn't have the cloth interior that it would have had from the 1940s. So anyway, those are the difference. Other than that, it's a pretty original car. It's got the original dash. It's got the original engine. It's got the supercharged 6-cylinder engine. Runs good. Does have a little trouble with the fuel pump, getting the fuel pumped up to it. So if you don't run it for a while, it's a little hard to start. But once you get it started and running, it runs good. Drives good. And it's got, the other thing that this car had, which was really unusual, is a 3-speed on the column transmission.
I'm going to demonstrate when the light turns green. I'm going to demonstrate how the overdrive works. You can get into overdrive in second and third gear, and you do it by taking it up to a certain RPM of the drive shaft, completely letting off the throttle, and that allows the overdrive clutches to engage, and then you're in about second and 2/3 gear, and then there's an electronic kick down if you needed to. Taking off in first gear, into second, letting off, it thumps, and now we're in 2 2/3, which is a great cruising gear for 35-40 miles an hour. Into third, and it's in third overdrive, which is a little too high, but I just put the foot feet down to the floor and kick back into third.
And that was a really unique thing. It was a really modern thing to have, was the 3-speed on the column. So the Cord actually had a semi-automatic transmission, and you actually had a shifter on the column next to the steering wheel. You shifted the gears, and then you would push the clutch, and it would hydraulically push the gears into place. Graham didn't put that system in. They just put the regular 3-speed transmission, but they did build a column shift, which ended up being a really common thing in the 50s and 60s. Toward the 70s, everybody wanted the floor shift again, but the column shift was the modern luxury in this car.
That's pretty cool. I'm trying to think if there's any other unique little stories. I thought, you had a sign designed and built for this, which I thought was pretty cool.
Oh yeah. I think it's there in the back seat. I took that ad that you did, that you found, and I took the car, and I had a sign built, custom made. But what's really funny is a lot of people thought it was an ad for the car. They didn't know this was a custom made sign. So I actually went on this graphics, this website called Fiverr, and got a graphics guy and had him make this car, or make this sign of the car using the old ad, and that is the original ad with the original color car on it. So it's kind of a cool sign. I thought it was cool, but I took it to a car show, and everybody said, I said, they started asking me questions about the car. I said, it's on the sign, it's there. And they said, oh, we thought the sign was an old ad.
Yeah.
So they didn't realize that was about this car. So, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. So yeah, that's the story of the Graham.
That's the story of the Graham. And actually, so the Graham Company, so in, obviously they built these cars in 1940. And then in 1941, at the end of 1941, everything had to be turned over to the war effort, including the Graham plant. And they made all kinds of war parts for things. And after the war, the Graham brothers, the ones that were left, I think there was one of them that died at some point, but they decided not to start up the car company again. They sold the factory off to Chrysler.
Yeah, the Hollywood was the final car.
That was the last car of the Grahams. And they sold the company, they sold the factory off to Chrysler, but the company actually remains. It even remains today. And I think you said you did some research on that.
Yeah, it seems like they went on to what did they started Madison Square
Garden in New York City.
Yeah,
the Graham Car Company is now the Madison Square Garden Company. That's the direct descendant.
Yeah,
So.
I don't know how many other car companies were able to pivot that successfully.
They did pretty well.
That's
I guess.
pretty cool. So
anyway, so the Graham family still exists in southern Indiana. There are some probably grandchildren and great grandchildren of the Graham brothers down there. They actually have a house. When I was in college, there was a Graham car show in Washington, Indiana, where the family was from. And we actually went out to the family home, which is a mansion right in the middle of Washington, Indiana. And there was a field behind, and we had the Graham car show there, and we ate breakfast on the porch of the mansion. I think it was like a Frank Lloyd Wright designed house, so it was very ornate, fancy house in the middle of this small town. And what's really interesting is, and I said, we got married using the Graham, Kathy and I did, but my wife's family is from Washington, Indiana, and her grandparents lived about a block and a half away from this Graham mansion that we had gone there years earlier at the Graham show, and they'd actually been out there looking at the cars. So they told me they had seen the car. So,
oh wow,
yeah, probably seen us.
Yeah, that's pretty
at the
cool.
show. So that was kind of cool.
Well, that's cool. All right. Well, thanks for sharing the story of the Grahams.
Yeah, that's the story of the Graham. So if you see a Graham car, you'll know a little bit of that about the history, and especially if you see a Graham Hollywood, it's kind of a special car.